All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to ServeNowEDU. We've taken a couple months off, but we are now back on track for 2017. I am Trent Carlisle, co-founder of Logical, the parent company behind ServeNow and ServeManager, and I will be your host today. Before we jump in today's topic and introduce our guest, I'll mention that we're always open to your ideas on topics and suggestions on guests. We have our guest book for March and April of this year, but we're looking to schedule out the remainder of the year, so definitely send any ideas our way. Just a heads up that in March, law firm practice advisor Jared Correa from Red Cave Legal will be talking to us about the cloud and its adoption by law firms and how that can impact their vendors, such as process servers. In April, we have a pretty interesting topic that's out of the box, which is using basic face reading and body language. That's with Ruth Reynolds out of North Carolina. She's a process server and private investigator, also president of the North Carolina Process Servers Association. So if you are interested in those topics, go to ServeNow, click on ServeNowEDU, and register for those. A couple other reminders before we get started. The recording of this webinar should be posted online sometime tomorrow on the ServeNowEDU section of our site, and you can also view these on YouTube or iTunes as a video podcast. So on to today's topic and guest. We are joined by Mark Schwartz, who works for OneLegal out of Northern California. OneLegal, as many of you probably know, is a large company in California. They're one of the more innovative companies in our industry. And as the program manager for OneLegal's Justice Group, Mark has certainly been our go-to on today's topic, which is e-filing. He hosted a panel of e-filing experts for us a couple years back during our ServeCon conference. If you want to go back and take a look at that, it's really interesting. You can view that at servecon.com, S-E-R-V-E-C as in cat, O and as in Nancy.com. So more about Mark and his role with OneLegal. He works directly with many e-filing courts project teams, including court management, which gives him a unique perspective to share on today's topic. During the session, I'll be asking Mark some questions that will give us some updates on e-filing in California, which courts are e-filing now, which courts will be e-filing in the future. In addition, we'll have a high-level discussion on what's happening in the rest of the U.S. on an e-filing front. So, with that said, Mark, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Trent. It's always cool to be on the airwaves, and hello to all my attorney service colleagues and brethren out there. It's great to be here today.
We had a pretty good turnout for this one, about 105 people registered. So
nice.
Yeah, hopefully they can all make it today. Just a heads up to the audience, as always, you'll be able to ask Mark questions along the way. Please use the questions widget in the GoToWebinar panel, and all questions will be written, so type those out. I'll be looking for those as Mark is speaking, and I'll try to get to all of those. So, Mark, let's get right into it. Why don't you start off by giving us a little history about e-filing in your home state. How well has the technology been adopted over the last couple decades in the California courts?
Well, the short answer is up until recently, very slowly. Those of you in California know this certainly as well as I do, but it's a tough crowd. That is, law firms and their staff are some of the most change-averse that I've ever worked with. Combine that with their lack of technical chops, and things have been moving, at least up until recently, at what I would call a glacial pace. You also look at things like technology debacles, such as the California Case Management System back in the early 2000s, CCMS, for those of you who aren't aware of the acronym. And that was originally designed to kind of have this kumbaya, as I like to call it, kind of thing where all the courts would talk to each other. And while certainly progress was made over the years, eventually cost overruns killed the project, and I qualify that a little bit. It was shelved in that there wasn't any more work done, but there are still some courts actually utilizing it. You also look at things like reduced funding and lack of staffing or reduced staffing because of the budget constraints that have been happening here in California for many, many years. That has also had a huge impact on technology, not just in the e-filing arena, but in other arenas in the court system. So a while back, I actually saw some comments from from Governor Brown, I guess he is a governor, who commented on a budget proposal by the courts and said, look, guys, the old way of doing business ain't working. You need to figure out a better way to do business. So that has kind of kicked the courts, if you will, a little bit in the behind, and they're starting to look at different options. Actually have been for quite a while. But then you kind of contrast that with recently, just last week actually, judges and executives from 49 California trial courts asked the Judicial Council here in the state for $149 million more dollars. Contrast that with what the Chief Justice here said when the governor's budget was put out, that the budget cuts were prudent. And I think all of this gives you a pretty good example of the somewhat disconnected nature up until recently in California.
Sounds like it's gone smoothly.
Yeah, very.
Obviously, it's been a struggle with funding being scarce and adoption having been slow. Are you starting to see that change a little bit, or are we still moving at that glacial pace that it's been moving at over the last 10 plus years?
Well, fortunately, the glacial pace is accelerating. There has been a much faster pace, and that's not, frankly, hard to make based on how slow it's been over the years, but within the last 2 to 3 years especially, things have really kicked into high gear, and there's better adoption of technology as well. That's not all having to do with folks like Tyler Technologies that has really brought it front and center to California and the rest of the country, but it has a lot to do with technology adoption overall. I believe some of that also comes from the demographic out there. We've got younger judges, younger lawyers, more tech savvy, legal secretaries and paralegals coming on board, and so what was challenging is now less challenging. But going back to Tyler, they came in and kind of filled that gap that CCMS left, and in so doing, they've really kind of kicked things into high gear here. As I like to say, not quite so eloquently, they've kicked everyone in the ass and kind of gotten us going about how things need to get done, and you know, get on board or be lost in the shuffle. There are 16 courts/counties that are currently using the Odyssey case management system, or CMS. Odyssey or Tyler also does an e-filing service provider tangent, if you will, not the right word, but they have that feature as well in their CMS, so they are also an EFSP, an electronic filing service provider. There are other vendors too, certainly, but Tyler has really brought this front and center and increased the speed at which things are happening. And you've got the Judicial Council too, which up until fairly recently hasn't been on board with modernizing the rules, but they really have done an amazing job, especially within the last year, modernizing the rules in California that have to do with e-filing and e-service, and trying to get some of those antiquated rules out of the picture, if you will. For example, bookmarking, text recognition, and pagination requirements are all now part of the California rules. And as usual, some of the courts are slow to get on board with what those rules mean, and certainly our technology challenged and somewhat change-averse customers are also a little slow. But you know, the rules are there now, and so everyone's going to have to toe the line. And I think most importantly, what you see with Tyler Technologies and other companies, whether that be EFSPs or case management service providers, case management system providers, I should say, the private sector is really filling the gaps and bringing a lot of that subject matter expertise to bear. And to the courts and the government's credit, they're listening to us. So it's definitely a sea change out here. And I would hazard to guess, same in the country. Things are really moving a lot faster nowadays.
As a reminder to the audience, definitely ask questions along the way, and we will be talking about more than just California as we go on with the webinar today. But just to get a clearer picture, you set the stage a little bit for us already about where California, the history, how we've gotten to where we are today. But where exactly are we in your state? Can you give us some specifics on where the courts are at, types of cases we're e-filing, number of filings that we're seeing in California?
Yeah, you bet. We've got 26 counties in California out of 58, for those of you who pay attention to those kind of fun facts. So 26 counties have some
all those counties, I just found out.
What's that?
And you live in the smallest of all of those counties.
Yes, I live in the small, happening little county of Alpine, which, by the way, is one of the Tyler courts and will eventually be doing e-filing. Their case management system is live. I spoke with the clerks just last year, but yeah, I live in the smallest populated county, certainly in California, out of the 58. 254, by the way, in Texas. Getting a little ahead of myself. We're going to talk about Texas in a minute, but so yeah, back to California. We've got 26 counties out here that are doing some sort of e-filing. About 16 of those for more than one case type. Well, up until fairly recently, the only county that you had doing general e-filing or filing through more than one case type was Orange County, and they had gone live many years ago. But now you see a lot more courts live with e-filing, and so as I said, about 16 or so have more than one case type. And out of those 16, 7 of them have some sort of mandate. So that is a far cry from, boy, just really last year even. Certainly more than 2-3 years ago. And then the rest of those counties are doing what I call one-offs. So for example, you've got Contra Costa doing complex, you've got San Bernardino doing small claims with a forms solution by Turbo Court, and there are many others. Tyler courts, the Tyler system has 19,000 user accounts created to date, and that was as of the end of last year. My apologies, I don't actually know when that started, but they've come in only really within the last couple of years and already have 19,000 folks signed up with them. And they do approximately 1,500 envelopes a day. So an envelope equates to a transaction, for those of you that aren't aware. So when you submit an electronic filing, let's say you have 3 documents in your filing, that transaction is one envelope. So those 1,500 envelopes could equate to thousands upon thousands of documents. That's per day, and that's just Tyler. And without having market share statistics in front of me, I can tell you that they have a good chunk of the market share, but they don't have it all. So if they're doing 1,500, you know that other EFSPs are doing a good amount of business as well. Speaking of EFSPs, there are 22 of them certified with Tyler in California. So the landscape has really evolved from just what was 1 or 2 EFSPs a couple of years ago to 22 of them today. And really that's just scratching the surface, Trent. We've got 58 counties, only 26 are doing some sort of filing, electronic filing that is. Many courts have not mandated, and that's kind of another problem. Without a mandate, what we've seen, and as many of you know, adoption is pretty slow. If folks can continue to do it the way they've always done it, they're going to, for the most part, continue to do that. But again, we're just really scratching the surface, and over the next few years, and I hate saying things like this, over the next few years, we'll probably see all 58 counties. Maybe, maybe not. I know that years ago, Bob Battaglia, our CEO, was saying, oh, it's coming. E-filing is coming. It'll be here in a few years. And then I would do the same. Okay, it's coming. It'll be here. And now it's actually here. So to make general statements about, well, we're going to see all 58 counties on board by 2020, hard to say. But the writing seems to really be on the wall with all of the things we've discussed, from lack of funding to technology adoption to the private sector coming in. I think we're gonna see a lot, if not all of those counties in California and many more states on board with e-filing pretty soon.
Yeah, it's not a quick moving thing we've seen over the last several years. We have a comment slash request from one of our attendees that sort of leads us into our next section here. And Jay, who's in attendance, says, Mark, please work on getting Inyo County on board with e-filing. There's nobody out there that can handle filings, semi-joking, of course, and parentheses.
You know, Jay, that's an interesting point. You can almost make the statement that the smaller counties have a harder time because they don't have the money. In some ways, that's not necessarily true because there is the workload allocation funding methodology, or WAFM, as I call it out here in California, that can take money from a larger court and give it to a smaller one. But it really depends on the court and, frankly, how well they've managed their rainy day fund, if you will. And so just because it's a small court doesn't mean they won't get things on board e-filing wise. And one of the other things that we've noticed is, and this is a drum that I'm banging with some of these smaller courts, is when you get this technology moving in your court, you're offsetting those closures and those staff reductions that you've had to do because of lack of funding, and you're giving your constituents the ability to do something they couldn't do before. They couldn't drive 200 miles during lunch to get to your court to file something in paper, but now they can electronically file it at lunch within 5 minutes. So hang in there, Jay. I don't have Inyo on my list, but if it's kind of like Alpine and some of the other small counties, they'll get there eventually.
So to sort of wrap up the California section of the webinar, it sounds like there's a lot that is going on, a lot that we'll be seeing in the next few months or so throughout the rest of the year. What are some of those things that we can look forward to?
Yeah, well, great question. Yeah, and again, not trying to be too California-centric, but being as that's my home state and where we're based, certainly that's where my core competency lies. But you look at things like Los Angeles, which is definitely California, but is really the largest court system definitely in the country and perhaps in the world. So when an LA court comes online with electronic filing, that's going to make a huge impact, and a lot of other courts are going to follow suit. So Los Angeles Probate starts in May on a permissive or voluntary basis. I prefer the word voluntary. Permissive just sounds kind of weird, but that's usually the terms the courts use. Either it's permissive, aka voluntary, or it's mandatory. So LA probate starts in May with a mandate in June. So the CIO of LA, Snorri Ogata, he gets it. He was actually the CIO of Orange County when they went live way back when. And he knows that in order to really drive adoption, mandates have to take place. So LA is now in the fray. And they're going to be doing, like I said, probate in May and then mandating in June. Family law in LA is coming on board in August with a mandate in September. And then you've got civil coming on later this year. So with LA, probate and family, interestingly, are with Tyler, and civil will be with a different case management service provider, EFM, called JTI. So that'll be an interesting dynamic. Now, something that I should caution you all, and that is the same thing I tell my colleagues here at One Legal: the situation is fluid and ever-changing. So don't necessarily count on a lot of what you hear from a court, although I spent a good chunk of my time validating this information. And so what you need to do when you hear something is certainly take it with a grain of salt, but at a certain point, once a court, for example, like LA, has published their probate dates, you know it's going to happen. San Mateo is another one. Right now, San Mateo is on the list for sometime in April with civil, family law, and probate. Santa Clara has already mandated several case types, and they're going to be bringing civil harassment, more civil, summons and complaints. I see S and SC, and I always think summons and complaints, old process server in me. Small claims, I should say, not summons and complaints, and unlawful detainer. So again, in Santa Clara, you got civil harassment, civil, small claims, and unlawful detainer between March and May. And then just to mention a couple of small counties, Butte and San Joaquin are also on my radar. They may have something going next month. So just be aware that, yeah, that situation does change, but some of those dates are pretty much carved in stone. And the best advice I can give all of you is know your court. And for those of you who have heard me on the process serving circuit, pay attention to your jurisdiction. Know the rules of the court from which the process originates, as I used to say in my serve classes, but the same thing really applies to e-filing. Know what's going on in your court, pay special attention, talk to those folks, and listen, as it's changing every day.
So we're going to, in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit about the national landscape when it comes to e-filing, and we're also going to talk about some things that you should be thinking about as an attorney service firm who wants to prepare themselves for e-filing. Before that, we have a question from Bob. His question is, how do law firms in California feel about an outside service performing filings instead of taking the control themselves?
Good question. As a former court runner, and that kind of goes back to the statement I made earlier about adoption and changing with technology, or just changing. It's hard to put a concrete answer to that question, but I guess I'll use my favorite saying, it depends. So if you're in an environment where you are in a non-mandated jurisdiction, then I think a lot of firms are taking the approach that, until I have to change, I'm not gonna. We also see some more technology savvy firms, especially those with some younger partners and some movers and shakers who get technology, are realizing that the cost savings are huge, that they can do things without less paper and less time by electronically filing. So we see that as well. The outsider thing, especially here in California, and I would suspect this is the same in every state, loyalty is huge in this business. If you develop a relationship with your law firm and your clients, you do the job well and you do it right, for the most part, it's going to be hard for them to switch. So, and that's one of the advantages that you might have, and we'll talk about that later on when we're talking about what you can do to prepare yourself.
Great question, Bob. Thanks for the response there, Mark. Definitely keep the questions coming. We are going to move on to the national landscape when it comes to e-filing. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing across the U.S. and other states.
Sure. The first thing I'd like to point out to all of you is, before you think, oh, okay, Missouri has e-filing, I'm in, I can do that. There's a concept that I like to talk about that's open versus closed ecosystems. So, for example, just because a state has an e-filing or has e-filing ability, Minnesota is a good example. Minnesota with Tyler Technologies is a closed ecosystem. There is no EFSP interaction, and so there's really no opportunity there unless you can, for example, talk to your customers, and maybe you want to be one of those crazy folks that does order placement for your customers using their credentials. I'm not advocating that, and I'm not saying that's possible in Minnesota, but I guess what I'm saying is think outside the box, for example. But this open versus closed ecosystem is an important concept to keep in mind. So just because a state or a county does some sort of e-filing doesn't mean you have an opportunity. In an open ecosystem, you certainly do. And some examples of that would be Texas. Texas has been e-filing since 2006, and right now they're rolling out criminal e-filing, so that's been in the civil arena, and they're rolling out criminal e-filing. They're going to be rolling out 221 counties in the next 3.5 years. They're also looking at a somewhat controversial proposal about online document retrieval and making documents available online for folks to get. There's been some controversy there, as some of you may imagine, because that is a revenue source for the courts, and so there's been a bit of pushback there. But nonetheless, Texas frankly, is doing a pretty good job at leading the charge on the e-filing and e-technology front, if you will. Indiana.
I
Go
was
ahead,
just going to
Trent.
ask, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off your train of
worries.
thought. In these closed ecosystems, does that also mean that there's no opportunity for a firm like a One Legal or whoever might want to do this to integrate with those courts and you have to use their interface and their logins to actually do these filings?
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. There is no integration, there is no certification. There may be an ability, as I said, and I know some of us do this today, where we'll intake the work from our customers via email and place their transactions for them. But in the strictest sense of open versus closed, no such option. So you don't have the ability to get your foot in the door there on the electronic filing front in those systems.
Thank you. Sorry. I think you were mentioning Indiana before.
Yeah, I was heading towards Indiana, the Hoosier state. We've got 7 electronic filing service providers in Indiana and more coming on board every day. Illinois is another example, right next door to Indiana, 2 to 3 EFSPs there. And when you look at volume of some of these states, you'd be surprised. They may not be California's or Texas's or New York's or Florida's, but there's some volume there to get. So if you can be part of that landscape, you may want to consider that. Maryland is another one where right now we've got Tyler and FileServe Express are doing work in one particular county. So Maryland may be an example of a state that's still trying to kind of figure it out and doing it more on a county-by-county basis. In fact, that brings up a good point. Not all states do it on a statewide basis. Texas did. Indiana is doing that. Minnesota did. California, as many of you know, county by county. So whether you have a statewide opportunity or even a county-wide opportunity, it depends on the state. And then Florida is doing a somewhat unique thing, and that is they're looking for folks who want to become third-party batch filers. And I have to be honest, I don't completely understand the concept other than it's essentially looking for EFSPs that can intake a ton of work and submit them all in one batch. So there is some sort of certification process, and that's really designed, I think, for the collection firms, those folks who some would call collection mills or similar companies or firms who do a ton of work with or for the same plaintiffs. So it's a varied landscape with a lot of opportunities, but again, going back to my earlier point, just because there's an e-filing there doesn't always mean there's an opportunity for us.
Got a comment from Bob in regards to Illinois. He's saying that effective January 1st, 2018, all civil cases shall be e-filed in the trial courts.
Hey, good job, Bob, paying attention. You got to be informed, man. That's it.
He's getting those Google alerts we're going to talk about later.
There you go.
And Kenneth has a question about Louisiana. I think this came in about the time that you were talking about the EFSPs. Wants to know if there are any in Louisiana, and if so, how many?
I honestly don't know anything about Louisiana, other than it is the only state in the country that doesn't follow common law, but instead follows, Kenneth, you probably know it, I can't think of the answer, but they follow a different type of law. So I don't know the answer to that, but I'll tell you what, if Trent wants to give you my contact info and you want to ping me, I'll do a little research to see what I can find out for you.
And they don't have counties, they have parishes.
They have parishes, right. And it's not common or civil law, it's...
Someone do some
driving me
Googling.
nuts.
Yeah, someone do some Googling so Mark doesn't lose it on this webinar.
Thank you. I hate it when I don't have the answer, especially when it's trivia.
Right. Trivia. Ooh, process serving trivia. Good times.
Oh, I see the wheels turning, Trent.
All right, let's, for some folks that aren't involved in e-filing right now, that might have this in their state, coming to their state, what suggestions or considerations might you have for your attorney service colleagues to help them be more prepared or informed?
Great question, and you know, that's why really we're here. I mean, I want to pass on all the news that I can, but in my mind, this is really about helping all of us do a better job. As I've always said, there's plenty of work for everyone. So, you know, the first thing that I'd like to emphasize, because I hear this a lot from our poor beat-up law firm customers, oh, I can't do this, the courts are mean and evil, all they want to do is reject my filings, this is hard to figure out, I don't know what I'm doing, I need more time, the court's mandating. And what I like to tell them is, just so you know, the courts are going through the same thing you are. They're learning too. Their staffs are learning too. They've got new systems in place. They've dealt with, for years, especially here in California, lack of funding, lack of resources, and so don't think that you're the only one who is suffering. The courts are too. Frankly, we're all in it. You know, we're all trying to figure this out to a certain extent as we go. And so what I like to tell law firms and legal secretaries and paralegal groups when I speak to them is have some empathy with the courts too. It is not their mission in life to reject your electronic filing. It is not their mission in life to be mean and evil, but they, like you, are learning. So empathy is a great thing to have, especially with the courts, and if you can represent that with your customers and that gets back to your court, hey, making some points with your court is always a good thing too. Be patient. That's another thing. 1990, fax filing came about in California, and for those of you who have been around long enough, you know that that was quite an adventure. Many of us thought we were going to go out of business. There was a big hubbub. We all kind of got out of our own way, and lo and behold, a lot of us were making money from fax filing and started making money within a few years. It didn't take right away, but that's my point about being patient. Things take time, adoption takes time, people start getting on board, courts start getting on board, the rules start equalizing, if you will, and so patience is something that is certainly helpful when you're talking about e-filing adoption. Another one, no terminology and no technology as best you can. I am not born and raised in the technology world, and some of that has been a bit challenging for me, but over the years, by asking questions and paying attention and taking advantage of other experts, I've learned some of the things that I can now pass on to you. Terminology also important. If you can understand CCMS, EFSP, EFM, CMS, APIs, all of those things let you have a better conversation with the courts, with your customers, and therefore you look and are, frankly, an expert and a knowledge and thought leader. So that's a big one as well. Ask questions, as I said earlier. Ask questions about to your courts, to your staff, to your colleagues, to your competitors. See what they're doing. Most of us will help each other. As I've said, there's plenty of work for everyone. Stay informed. Figure out a way to keep in the loop. NCSC, the National Center for State Courts, a great resource. I think Trent is going to put a link in the blog post to NCSC, but if not, it's ncsc.org, and you can get a lot of good info there. There's a lot of good information available on social media. LinkedIn especially has tons of groups that you can follow that have to do with e-filing and e-service and e-courts and e-technology. Google alerts sounds simplistic. Trent alluded to it earlier. I spent a good chunk of my time monitoring my Google alerts and putting in keywords like e-filing, e-service, Tyler, certain courts that I want to follow. So all of a sudden I get an alert and I don't have to get blindsided by something that in the past I wouldn't have even known. And if you're in California, follow the Odyssey eFile California site. Again, that's a link I think Trent's going to put in the blog post, but if not, just ping me. I'll send you that link, or just Google Odyssey eFile California. It's a link or a page is actually with all the courts, who's going live and when. Well, actually doesn't have upcoming. It kind of has coming soon, but more on point, it has who's live now, who's mandating, whether they accept electronic checks or not, things like that. And if you, in California, you have the Judicial Council. In Texas, you have an equivalent body. I imagine most states, if not all, have an administrative office of the courts or a Judicial Council type body. Follow them. I regularly attend JCIT meetings. That's the Judicial Committee on Information Technology. That's a Texas committee. they host webinars where you can just sign on and listen and hear what's going on. California, the Judicial Council Technology Committee, JCTC, hosts public meetings where you can also listen in and learn what's going on. And then you can attend events, attend Judicial Council meetings. So I guess my biggest message is, you've got to plug in and spend a lot of time really managing the information that's coming at you, because there's a ton of it. But if you don't do that, then just stick your head in the sand and wait for things to happen. Obviously, that's not what you want to do. If you're thinking about jumping in, then consider what kind of value adds you can bring to the table. There's lots of competition out there, at least in most areas. So do you have some brand recognition? If you don't, think about how you can get it, because it's certainly a tougher slog if you don't have it. If you do have it, take advantage of those relationships, as I mentioned early on. If you have a good customer base in your particular state and your state is going to roll out e-filing, hey, you've got an in that other EFSPs maybe don't have. So definitely look at that. Help your customers. That's another big thing. We spend a lot of time at One Legal helping our customers deal with technology, training them on the rules, and teaching them how to deal with this stuff so they're more comfortable. That helps them, and of course it helps us. It breeds loyalty. We help them out, and they think of us when they want to do their next e-filing. Be a resource is another one. Be sticky, as they say in the marketing world. If you can be a resource for your customers and they come to you for answers, then you're going to, again, be that person or that agency who maybe gets that work when someone who wasn't being so sticky or helping that law firm wouldn't get it. And last but not least, don't be afraid to change. It's scary. I get it. I started in this business when I was just a kid, and I've seen a lot of change. And what you need to do is embrace change. Don't be afraid to change. Do what you need to do to stay relevant. And that's, I think, my biggest message.
Yeah, Mark, as you mentioned, we will be posting all the links and resources that you mentioned today on ServeNow on our blog post of this webinar, which will also include the recording, the video recording as well. We've pretty much come to the end of the planned conversation today, but I think we have a few minutes for questions. If people have them out there, we'll stay on for a few more minutes. We did have a question come in from Robin. It's a little bit long, so bear with me here, Mark. Robin is saying, we service documents from California and Tennessee. We provide the affidavits electronically to the client. Why would they still request the hard copies? Robin's confused how the process server's role comes into the picture. Tennessee will be the last to come around. Can my business in Tennessee support e-filing in those states already technically functioning?
Yeah, Robin, you should be able to. What you could be running into out here in California, if someone is requesting the original affidavit, is perhaps a court that does not accept electronic filing. It could also, frankly, be someone out here who doesn't know that there is an option. If nothing else, all 58 counties in California do allow fax filing in civil, probate, and family law jurisdictions. So they could essentially take your proof of service or your affidavit, attach it to a California rules compliant face page, and file it by fax. So not quite sure. You also, some courts that do electronic filing and fax filing have some restrictions as to certain document types they will accept in those formats. I'm not aware of any court that won't accept an affidavit, but that's possible too. It sounds to me, though, Robin, it's probably more to do with education than anything else.
Have you recalled the type of law in Louisiana yet?
No.
You have an answer. All right. Latrina wins the trivia contest.
Yay.
The law that governs in Louisiana is Napoleonic law.
Thank you. Napoleonic, yes, our little man Napoleon.
Thank you, Latrina.
Yeah, they still have that French influence. The only state in the country that has that type of law. Yeah. Thank you for that. I feel much better now.
He says you're welcome. So, I don't see any more questions. We'll be wrapping it up here with some final comments, but if I see any other questions coming through, I will certainly read those and ask those. But Mark, thank you so much for being here today. You are always a wealth of knowledge. We will certainly be linking to One Legal's website from the blog post. So if you have any questions, I'm sure you can track Mark down by calling or emailing One Legal, or you can just contact us over at ServeNow, and I'd be happy to connect you with Mark. So also, thank you for joining us, all of you that are out there today. Really good turnout. Again, notes and video recording should be available sometime tomorrow. And for those of you who made it today, you'll also be getting an email with that link in the next couple days as well. So if you forget about it, we will certainly remind you. Looks like, oh, one last question. I was seeing a bunch of great presentation. Thank you both. Very informative. Thank you. A lot of those came through. And cool. Then another question. Oh, I do have a question not related to the topic, but I'm not seeing that question. So if that comes through, let me see here. LASC. So question is from Mark. LASC, will court ever allow for an alternative portal, or will they be using the assigned portal? I don't know what that means. I'm assuming you have some sort of idea.
I think you're talking about the court's own portal. There are some courts that do that. For example, San Francisco has its own e-filing portal that is not an EFSP portal. You can actually go directly to the court. If that's your question, then from what I know in LA, they will not take that approach. They're going to instead focus on the EFSP approach. There is a rule of court, I can't quite remember the exact rule here in California, that essentially reads, in order for a court to mandate, they have to have at least one EFSP and a court portal, or two EFSPs or more. And LA has taken the second approach. So last I heard, they're not going to be doing any kind of their own portal. Hopefully that's the question you're asking, and I answered it for you.
Yeah, and if it's not, certainly contact us, and we can connect you with Mark. I think Latrina, Mark said that was the answer to his question. I think Latrina had some other questions as well. I gave her your email, so hopefully you guys can connect. And that being said, Mark, thank you again, all of you out there across the U.S. And I haven't looked to see if anyone's outside of the U.S., but thank you all for joining us today. Great turnout. And look forward to seeing you next month. Go sign up for March and April's ServeNowEDU. Have a great Thursday evening, everyone.
And thank you to you, Trent, for hosting such a program. And thank you all for coming today. It's been great hanging out with you.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much. Take care, Mark.
You too. See you, everyone.